Hey, David, how's it going?
Great, Joe. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Today we have David Mertz on the Data Nerd Herd. So, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, so I have a lot of different backgrounds. I'm kind of well known in the Python community. I've been very involved with that in particular for since 1999 or something. But I wrote for many years some very widely read articles about Python in the sort of 2000s were the most read things in the world. A column for IBM Developer Works called Charming Python that was delightful to have millions of readers of that, like literally
Wow.
millions, which is just wonderful. And it was freely published, and it was so nice to get fan mail from, especially from like the developing world and things like that,
Hmm.
where I'm really helping people who wouldn't have access otherwise. But that was a long time ago, and since that time, I've done a lot of other things. Um, Many of them in the Python community. For example, I was a director of the Python Software Foundation board for 6 years. I'm
Nice.
forgetting which six, but it was sort of 2010s. um, it started in 2009 or 2000. Anyway, whatever. For a while, I was that, and I'm on a bunch of committees and do a lot of stuff in that community. But over the number of years, I've moved more and more into specifically scientific computing. Um, First, in I was technically a consultant, but really an employee for 8 years for a wonderful, wonderful company called D. Shah Research that built the world's fastest supercomputer for doing computational dynamics, molecular dynamics, which is to say, protein folding. And they made their own interconnects, their own silicon, so that it could be 1,000 times faster than the next best supercomputer in the world. If what you want to do is this, if you want to do anything else, it's no good. So that was really cool, and that was obviously an embedded space for many of the developers. But there's tons of tooling that surrounds that, in queuing and storage and just general you know tools that are needed. And that was stuff that I developed a lot of it, and that was Python stuff. But then even past that, I worked for uh, what was then called Continuum Analytics, but rebranded as Anaconda while I was there, which is
Oh.
kind of a premier player in open source scientific Python.
Hmm.
Um, and I developed the training program there. So I made the material, but then taught lots of scientists, but also lots of quants and lots of just sort of regular development people and companies and government. And then a bit of a stint as a CTO of a tiny company doing machine learning stuff. And of late, mostly I wrote the book for pandemic and have done like development of video training and stuff, particularly with this client INE of for the last 8 months or something like that. That's sort of been the primary ones I've been working with. Um,
So, you're pretty busy.
yeah, I've had a hand in a number of things, and
Yeah.
it's so exciting to learn new areas, but obviously data science specifically, and these areas of machine learning are really hot and interesting to know about,
Hmm.
and important things that people are using data for lots of different purposes that are compelling and important for business or organizational reasons. And I mean, I can transition myself. You probably have a question to make the transition, but essentially, like in this experience over a number of years, it's kind of a truism when you talk to data scientists like myself, that the large majority of what we do in before we get to the sexy stuff, before we get to rich visualization of data or machine learning models, deep neural networks perhaps, or more classical ones, or even just sort of, data analytics, is you have to do a whole lot of cleaning up of your data to make it ready
Mm.
to get to these other interesting tasks. And that's sort of the silent part that is not spoken of so much. I mean, it's spoken of, but it's the it's sort of the thing that, is not worthy of specifically being addressed because, well, you just have to do that.
Which
And
is
so, like any of these books that are you read about, there's a new book out on. I'm not referring to a specific one, but there might be a new book out on TensorFlow, for example, which is an exciting, high quality, neural network library. I mean, tensor library specifically.
yeah. Uh,
Um, and a book like that, or on any other particular tool, or including the visualization tools, will have a sort of throwaway section in the preface or a glossary or, in chapter 1 or something where it'll say, well, yeah, by the way, you have to spend most of your work cleaning the data before you can do all these things that this tool allows you to do. And they acknowledge that. It's a recognized thing. But at the same time, the fact that it's the large majority of what you need to do is it's not what they want to write about in their book. And so I felt like there really needs to be a book that's that. I mean, I guess you were going to hold up the title or whatever like
yeah,
that.
I'll do a quick screen share here real quick. So, speaking of books, do you want to talk about
That's
your
what
new
it
one?
looks like.
Yeah.
I can go grab from my shelf the physical
Yeah, let's do
copy.
that. Let's show the paper one.
One
So,
second.
yeah.
Oh, if I can remember what shelf I put it on. I really should know where my book is. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, yeah. So, ta-da, after, looking at my my pandemic clothes and my
That's fine.
sweatpants,
We all wear the
this
same
is what
clothes
the
now.
actual physical thing looks like.
That's awesome. That's a big accomplishment, though. You got the pandemic book, and congratulations. Like seriously,
Yeah, thank you so
that's
much.
awesome. But I think to your point, though, it's interesting because I actually just pulled another book off my shelf here. I think that this book would be less sexy if it was called Hands-on Data Cleaning, right? Like this wouldn't be O'Reilly's #1 book, which this one
Yeah,
is. If it was hands-on data janitoring with Python and stuff, so which is sad because I mean, even as the title of your book shows, it's like doing the other 80% of the work,
yeah.
and it's true. I mean, anyone who's done data,
I mean, that's a nice text you have. I haven't read every word, but I have that on some other shelf in the house,
mhm,
and I've looked through it, and it's very nicely done.
it's very
Um,
nicely done.
but it's exactly as I characterize. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't remember if it's the preface or the appendix or whatever, but there's a little bit that says just what I said in that book and in every other book.
Right. It's kind of like you're going to learn machine learning, and there's just stuff that you will be doing, but we'll skip that. We'll go to the. Why do you think that is, though? I mean, why aren't people more upfront about, I guess, the realities of data cleaning?
I think there's a couple reasons. I mean, both is that it is very varied what you need to do. And I try to address a lot of different aspects of that through the book, but clearly I'm not going to get to every individual task that somebody might need to do.
Hmm.
And there is a kind of unity if you look at one particular library. If you're reading the documentation of scikit-learn, okay, there's a lot of models, but still they have a unified API and there's some commonality there, so there's a thing to talk about. With the data cleaning, it's much more heuristics and ad hoc, and
Mm.
I mean, ideally it shouldn't just be cargo culted, but it's a lot of improvised techniques that come from different directions. And I mean, I've got some reaction in discussions with people who have looked at this either in development or subsequently who and not exactly a strong push, but people have an expectation maybe for these kind of books that they're going to be a cookbook, which mine is very much not. And it's very deliberately not that,
Hmm.
because what I want to give to readers is a kind of set of conceptual tools for
Right.
how they would approach thinking about these issues. And, certainly I talk about, pandas, and I talk about the R tidyverse, and I talk about, some command line tools and some particular libraries that are helpful for doing these kind of tasks. But I really don't want to focus on, well, this is the API, this is the method or the function that this particular library provides for doing this exact thing. I mean, in passing, I have to get that, but more this conceptually is what you're trying to do when you're faced with these kind of situations. And I don't think that lends itself to, the recipe. It lends itself to a more coherent narrative, which is what I try to tell in the book. It's almost like this, Bildungs Romans or something like that, a travel novel, where I don't know if you know that word, but it's almost like these are the steps one goes through as a data scientist in the process of, acquiring new data, being, given in whatever organizational context that you have this data to work with, in the process of the various kinds of manipulations that you will make on it, and the kind of considerations, analyses of potential flaws in the data that you will try to reveal, until you finally get to the sort of point of arrival where you're ready to do all the things that all those other books talk about. But, it's sort of like understanding the structure of that journey that is important, rather than just, look up on page 67, like, here's the code that does that exact thing.
Right.
You have to understand why you're doing that thing.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency for people to expect that the books are just going to be some larger version of, or printed version of Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting balance, but for the people watching, I mean, what are the key concepts around data cleaning that people should know on this journey?
Well, so essentially there's sort of three movements here. And I mean, they're listed as parts in the table of contents, but one element is data ingestion, that you get data that comes in a variety of formats. And those are kind of structurally different kinds of formats. Sometimes it is some sort of tabular format to start with, like CSV files, or access to SQL databases with tables, or a few other formats. Sometimes it's more hierarchical, stuff like JSON and XML, or document-oriented databases. Sometimes it's what, I just sort of have to call miscellaneous, of things like extracting metadata from images, or doing, summary of the pixel characteristics of images, or other kinds of formats, funny binary formats that have this and that embedded in them, or a variety of other things. Sometimes act as, like things like web scraping or PDFs, which can have valuable data inside of them, but exactly how you get that data out and how you utilize it is a process. Mm-hmm. But so you're presented in your job, in your task, with the data in whatever form it comes. And each of these different forms have a variety of kind of characteristic issues or problems that you are more likely to encounter at the side of, mechanical representational level, where certain kinds of things can or can't be represented, or at least there's certain kinds of errors that more typically creep in within a particular concrete format. But after you've thought about that, you have your data in the particular concrete format, and you've cleaned it up in the ways that are characteristic of that, then it sort of goes through two cycles more, and each of those is subdivided further, is that you want to think about identifying particular problems, but you want to think first about identifying particular problems at the level of individual data points, where a value is missing, or a value is unreasonable statistically. It has a z-score, so it's very statistically unlikely that occurred, or other kinds of statistical tests. But still, it's sort of a characterization of one data point. So how do you identify those? And I discussed various techniques about going about that. But then you think about it more systematically. You think of the data set as a whole that you've got to at this point, and there's kind of overarching concerns. For example, bias in observation that will skew the data in various ways. And so how do you identify those kind of problems that are more global to your data? And then I kind of cycle through those two concepts again at the end about remediation. So how do you go about remediating which basically means imputing values for individual values that are missing or you consider them unreliable in the raw data set. Or anyway, so that's the chapter that's called value imputation. But then you can kind of think about things more systematically, and this in a way moves into the machine learning more properly than data cleaning, but it's at that border where you want to think about actually creating synthetic features that are more useful. So in a way, it's treating the data holistically, but what would you like this data to express in a holistic way, but it's still making up values in some sense, the way that value imputation is. I mean, it's, rather than filling in one data cell, one point with, for example, a typical value that you might expect, an average across that column or something like that, or more sophisticated techniques that look at trends and so on. But this is like what's actually useful for our visualization or our predictive purpose is something that can be deterministically derived from what you can actually observe, but it's not exactly those. It's, perhaps combine several columns in some sort of numeric way in order to produce something that's ultimately going to be more powerful in doing the kind of, task that you want to accomplish. And so after you've done that, you're ready for the book on scikit-learn or the book on TensorFlow or the book on Keras or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that this was, I think anyone who's gotten into machine learning at some point, or even analytics, has come across these problems, right? Especially at the ingestion phase. And it's interesting seeing some of the workarounds when you don't have a blueprint, kind of like what you described, and you're just kind of making it up as you go along. It ends with some, I would say, some pretty hilarious results and some pretty nasty ones as well. So
yeah. And one of the morals that I really try to emphasize, I mean, of course, I say it in the preface and I sort of put a little aside throughout the book of saying this, but this is such good advice that version your data.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make various changes as you do, analysis of, improbable values that are detected by statistical test, or as you impute new values on some basis, or, as you just clean up the mechanical format in the ingestion, and you make a bunch of assumptions. And at the time you're making them, they seem inevitably correct. Clearly this has to be this. And it draws you into a tendency to okay, let's just overwrite the old data because clearly that's a correction that I want to make. Mm-hmm. And, often you're right in that assumption, but sometimes you're not. And then if you do it in a destructive way where you can't really revisit that assumption, then it's lossy overall. And there's, of course, different approaches to versioning. I mean, if you actually, depending on the data set sizes, if you can actually version, like in version control, that's great. Mm-hmm. But even if it's just components of your overall cleanup script where, in memory you have version A and then you do some transformations and you have version B, fine. Even if you need to reclaim the memory space because it's a big enough data set that, you want to do that, at least you could run the program again and you're not really losing anything other than, computation time that was involved.
Interesting. What are your thoughts about, I guess, addressing data issues at the source systems that the data is generated from?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
So you're talking about ingesting data, for example, maybe from a database. That database, let's take a classic ERP system. Somebody's keying in data into an order system or something like that. Yeah. Data in these systems is notoriously bad because of fat fingering and typos and stuff. I mean, how much do you think that the efforts of the data scientist who's doing the cleaning, how much do they maybe work back with the person doing the data entry to just solve the problems in the way that the data is being input in the first place?
So that's really a question of social relationships, which is an important question. But from a technical level, as data scientists, you can identify characteristic problems. And for example, I do have discussions of problems that are, like typo problems. They're the kind of things that typically arise when you might have like manually keying in of data. But there's all kinds of other sources of, an instrument that is making an observation. It is flaky, so it produces unreliable observations. And data gets transcribed between different formats, and sometimes there's systematic errors that come in. And I give lots of ways to detect each of these kinds of things. But assuming you want to go back to the provider of your data and say, well, here's a practice that's imperfect, and you want to improve that collection process to have better reliability, that's very much a question of the kind of relationship you have. I mean, if I'm working at a company that's providing a service to the other company that's providing me with the data, I probably don't have a lot of ins to change their process. I mean, I can make recommendations, and I have in my career done just that. And, mostly they sort of get filed on the back shelf and not really paid attention to, because that's, the reality of organizations. But maybe they get considered especially if you have some sort of specific better practice that you could recommend that would speak to that. If it's within your sort of large organization, maybe you have a little more in, but again, there's maybe departments. And sometimes data's, archival or historical, and somebody else did something wrong. And I'm not like a moral condemnation of them, but the data that, the processes they created data that has problems with it, but they did that in the past, and that's all done. The person is perhaps not at the organization, or even if they are, they're not doing that particular job anymore. And in any case, that particular data collection technique is not what's currently being used. Well, there's no way really to, remediate the practices of the past. You can remediate the artifact, the data that was produced by that, but, the data is what it is at that point.
So it seems like these are pretty important techniques for data scientists to know then, right? Because you're not going to be able to go back and typically fix things.
Very often not. I mean, very often in a role as a data scientist, you have little influence or visibility into that.
Right.
Sometimes you do. And I mean, certainly being able, if things are on an ongoing basis where things are collected and you can really rigorously identify the kinds of bias or the kinds of systematic error that exist in a particular data set, then, hopefully that is advice that can be acted on. And hopefully the particular, this instrument is unreliable, or this, key entry technique is unreliable, or, there's bias in the way that you monitor the TCP packets that doesn't give you insight into, certain subsets of them that would be informative, or a variety of things where I may analytically be able to identify these kinds of distortions. And, ideally going forward, maybe that can be made better.
Interesting. Kind of switching gears a bit. You've been in the Python community for, I'd say, a very long time at this point.
Yeah, I guess it's been the majority of my life now at this point. I hadn't really thought of that before just now, but I think that's true.
That's awesome. What are some of the big shifts that you've seen in Python over the, I guess your duration being a Pythonista?
One of the things I find very gratifying is I think that it's really taken over in scientific and numeric computing, and which includes data science and machine learning. I think 10 years ago, there were a variety of different languages that were very prominent. And I think to a large extent, Python is at least the first choice for many, many of these tasks. And I mean, I love the language, so that's gratifying to me. But I think it also means that the quality of libraries, which are shared by more people and developed by more people, has, in step, improved at the same time. I mean, NumPy has been around for a very long time. And that's a foundation of a lot of that in the Python world. And Travis Oliphant, who is an old friend of mine, but founder of Continuum Analytics, and that I worked for, and a bunch of other important things that he's done, was all kudos to him for whatever year that was, 95-ish or something like that he first released NumPy. I may have the year slightly wrong, but it was a while back. Or no, sorry. Is it? Sorry. I'm a decade off. 2005-ish, not 95-ish.
It seems more right. Yeah, I was like, wow, he must have been working on that a really long time ago. So either way.
That was just a glitch in my brain. What I mean is mid 2000s, not mid 90s. Anyway, so that's a base stone, and so it's really allowed a lot of these other things to happen. But there's so much that's built on top of that. Everything from scikit-learn to Matplotlib to the SciPy ecosystem to ultimately to things that don't strictly use NumPy, but like PyTorch and TensorFlow that at least are extensions of that ecosystem. Even if, for example, PyTorch gratuitously for no reason renames methods that were perfectly fine in NumPy. I don't know if you've worked with this.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
I mean, it's just silly stuff like, clip versus crop or, whatever for, truncating a value at a certain maximum or minimum, which there's lots of names, or trim. I forget what it's called in each of those because they get jumbled in my head because there's these different libraries that are largely overlapping, but they decide to spell things differently. You learn it. I mean, you can always look it up, but anyway, so conceptually though, NumPy did lay the space for these other tools.
But I mean, when machine learning, I think it was getting into vogue in the, at least I think when you're able to start doing machine learning on GPUs, it must have been in commodity hardware. I think I started seeing a rise in maybe the late 2000s, 2010-ish. You could start getting CUDA cards and stuff, kind of commodity hardware. But back then, it was...
They really got powerful enough to be really effective in doing this stuff, I think is even, I don't know, 2015-ish or something.
Yeah, but I think the whole thing though was up to that point, Python had some share, but it wasn't really anything like what you saw around 2015 or something, where all of a sudden it just exploded. In fact, the number of Python libraries for machine learning was practically nil around the early 2010s. I mean, I was using more like Java Weka at the time and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's on the right. And I started a Python meetup around 2013 or something like that. And it was a web dev meetup then. But it seemed like around 2014, all of a sudden everyone started showing up to do Python or do a data science and machine learning. Nobody cared about Django anymore. They're like, I want to learn about sklearn and all this fun stuff. So pandas, I should point out, right? So, yeah. It's what do you think drove all that?
Too.
Yeah.
I mean, R certainly preceded pandas in the kind of data frame paradigm or whatever you call it, that sort of technology. And there is great development in R, and the tools there are good. But I think pandas, adding that paradigm of thinking of data was very important, obviously, as well.
Mm-hmm. But I guess it's I don't know. I want to get your take on this. I mean, how do you think that Python's gone from being sort of the because the longest time it was kind of the second best language in everything, and maybe it is still, it's the old moniker that was used for it, but it was kind of a joke. But now it's widely perceived as just being a data language. Is that your perception as well? Or am I just off base on that?
Oh yeah, no, very much it is. I mean, I think that. I don't have statistics, but I think most university education and engineering departments has gone in that direction, or computer science. I don't know, maybe computer science. I'm not really quite sure, but it definitely in the sort of what gets called data science, it's definitely the first thing people talk about.
Hmm.
So I mean, there's still a lot of people writing Django code, and
Yeah.
that's definitely a huge ecosystem there as well. Um, which, I mean, it's not one I personally care about as much, but
Right.
that doesn't mean that there aren't other people using that for a good purpose. But it doesn't feel like, I mean, like Django is the web framework most people use if they're writing websites. I mean, big websites. I mean, if you're doing just a web service, maybe Flask makes more sense. But for the actual, large infrastructure thing, um, but I'm not sure it's necessarily. I'm not sure it's second best, but there's lots of other languages that still are around that people
Hmm.
do web stuff in. It doesn't have that kind of preeminent role.
Right.
Um, I mean, like, I don't know, probably more websites are like using Node and JS than,
I think almost every website has some element of something JavaScript in it, right? Whether you're talking TypeScript or Node or something.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess it's almost. I don't know how you would. And in fact, I don't know how you'd write a modern web stack without some element of that these days. Because like React, I think you guys spin up Node behind the background, right? And it's like I think
yeah.
everything's yeah. So you don't see as
Well, I mean,
much.
sure,
What?
the client end. I mean, on the
Yeah,
client,
yeah,
you
yeah.
throw some
On the back
JavaScript to
end
the,
though, it's yeah. It's I think there was like a kind of a trend where Node was like the cool thing for the back end for a bit, but then when Go and I think a few other languages came out, it's like why don't we just use that instead? It's just more
yeah, no, that's
performant.
true.
And,
Go's got a big position there as well.
yeah,
But in any case, there's like,
yeah,
if you wanted to, okay, you're going to throw some JavaScript at the browser to do a variety of things, but you're thinking of writing your server at this point, if sort of, greenfield, you're making the decision. There's a number of different programming languages and a
right,
number of different libraries that are plausible as
yeah,
choices and have, good tools and good libraries, and there's, cases to be made for them. Whereas if you want to develop a neural network,
hmm,
image recognition with deep learning and something like along those kind of lines, or GAN or whatever
hmm,
the particular goal is there, you're pretty much going to be choosing Python.
yep,
I mean, maybe you're going to choose TensorFlow, maybe you're going to choose Chainer, maybe you're going to choose PyTorch, but but all of those are Python. And I know there's some other tools that do exist in some other languages, but they feel much more like niche at this point.
yeah, yeah, they do. They just don't have the mind share either. So if you're going to look up to pick up skills, right, you're going to pick up like the niche obscure language way over here, or are you going to do Python, right? For data
Yeah,
science, it's like not even a question at this point. So, whereas like I make an argument, like back in the day, you could have made an argument that that might have been not been your first choice, but just given the trajectory of things, it's like indisputably the dominant language for data science. So it's interesting.
I mean, in a way, I wanted to, as much as I love Python, I was very deliberate in using a good number of R examples in the book
Right. Hmm.
because it does have a role in, the sort of especially in the sort of statistics end of
Hmm.
data science. But, um, as much as I like this language and this community that I've been so involved with being dominant in a way, I don't really want monocultures. So I sort of think that other things are interesting as well.
Are seeing a bit of a comeback as well, which I find interesting too. And I've been a long time R user, a big fan of it. I just, personally, I use it for a hand calculator if I need to do any stats, for example.
Yeah.
It's like the first thing you go for just because it's way easier. It's already built in. Just fire it up and get going, right? So, but yeah, I think it's interesting too because yeah, I agree. Like I don't want there to be like language wars or any this like tomfoolery. It's kind of silly in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, but at the same time, it is. I think it's unique getting a perspective of somebody like yourself who's just been in the Python ecosystem for seemingly forever at this point. I mean, you were the Python Software Foundation in 1999. I mean, that was. I mean, walk me through that. What was the Python? I guess the community like back in '99.
Oh, it was really it was very warm. I mean, that's a lot of what drew me to it, even as much as the technical aspects of it. I mean, the appearance of the language is very readable and it has a good standard library, and that could be said to some extent of some other languages too. But on the mailing lists in the year 2000 or something, where you would, or they were not even mailing lists like Usenet back then, or it was
Yeah.
Mirrored and so on. And you would get a few of the people who are still luminaries today, like, I mean, Guido obviously, but Tim Peters or Alex Martelli, who would opine on these topics that were under discussion. And they would just be both so inviting to other
That's
people,
cool.
but also so just absurdly erudite, in which appeals to me as with my academic background. And I mean, my background's actually in not this at all. I have a doctorate in post-structuralist philosophy, political
Interesting.
philosophy. Um, but I'm interested in a very large number of things from a lot of different domains. So having this community of people who are very, technically sharp and no deep math and no programming theory and no, computer science and all this sort of thing, but they also are very, Renaissance in their interests. Um, to me, that was very appealing. I'm not, different people come from different places,
Hmm.
but I just thought, oh yeah, these are my people. And then once, a few years after that, I actually started going to the conferences and knowing all these people in the hallway track of the conferences, and they're my friends and my colleagues. It just felt, very inviting. And I think that's still the case. And I think that as a community, even even more than back 15 years ago, it's really become much more inclusive in a sort of global sense of having many more
Hmm.
members in the global South and worrying about gender inclusivity and sexual identities and things like that.
Hmm.
Not that it was ever horribly discriminatory before that, but that's been one of the things that, as as the Python Software Foundation as an organization, has been very conscious of and done a pretty good job about in diversifying the community.
Hmm.
I mean, I think even a lot of other, you know, analogous organizations and communities have made efforts as well, but I think Python has done even better.
Seems to. I know when uh, they were looking at they were looking for locations for the 2022, 2023 locations, and reached out to some members of my meetup group here in Salt Lake City, and just asked,
Mm-hmm.
what's the diversity like in Utah? Um, Kind of a trick question almost, because it's notoriously very homogenous. But and we said, look, I mean, there's I think it's improving. It's not quite what the stereotype is. There's women in executive roles in tech companies. We're getting, I would say, a broader spectrum of non-white people here, and that
Mm-hmm.
it is what it is, and apparently they're going to be coming here now. So for the 2022 and 2023 conference, I believe. So I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty cool. But I was impressed that they would ask that question in the first place, and not just try and figure out, oh, where can we get the what's got the best hotels, where can we cram the most people into,
Yeah.
how can we make the most money out of this, right? So I thought that was to me that represented like it definitely boosted the PSF in my eyes for just, I think, deliberately being conscious of those types of things. So
Yeah. And I mean, the conference organizing committee is really such great people. I
mhm.
guess Ernest isn't still chair anymore, is he? Someone else has taken over as the
I don't
PyCon
know.
chair.
I have no idea.
Um, but he did a great job for a couple of years, and then we had pandemic and missed the
Yeah,
in-person conference for 2 years. I mean,
right.
we will have missed it for this year as well. For
Hmm.
it's still not quite ready to schedule, but it'll be wonderful to go to SLC in next year.
Yeah, we'll have to hang out. So, um, but yeah, it is interesting too, because as you point out, that Python's become a global phenomenon too, right? So it's not just back in the days. I mean, so for your book, for example, do you know, or I guess the books you've written, do you have any idea of, I guess, readership or kind of around the world in terms of an interest in Python books over the years? Have you been able to get any info on that?
Oh, I'm not quite even quite sure what question you're asking. I mean, obviously the number of books published has exploded,
Hmm.
but it has in other technical areas as well. But there are a huge number of books in every area about each individual library and each sort of audience level and things like that.
Hmm.
Obviously, varying quality, um, but
Yeah.
I think you're asking something else more specific than that.
Yeah, I was asking if you personally had gotten any information that would show kind of geographical trends over the years of the readership of your books, your Python books.
Oh, no, that I really don't know.
Okay.
Sorry, I wish I had an idea.
No
I
worries.
certainly, it does feel like, in particular, India has grown a lot,
Hmm.
um, in technical communities and Python developers. But I think that partly I did get to give a keynote in India. Oh, what year was that? 2013 or something, which was
Nice.
just wonderful, delightful to
That's
go
cool.
visit. And many of the people I met in person, I knew over email prior to that, and many others became new acquaintances and ongoing friendships. So I do have some personal relationships, but even those that I don't know them as anything other than a name and email. It does feel like, I wind up seeing more people from Indian Python community.
Hmm.
But I do think, I mean, but India's huge. It's as to what, 1.2 billion now or 1.1 billion. I mean, a lot of people. So you'd kind of expect a lot of people in this particular niche that you and I live in.
Hmm.
And I think that politically, there's probably at least as many in China, but China's sort of more politically closed, and I think I'm in some way less likely to hear from them.
Hmm.
And I think, I mean, well, also there's just the issue that English as a second or third or fourth language for educated Indians is pretty much universal,
Right.
whereas it's not quite as true in China. I mean, clearly there's a lot of multilingual educated Chinese people as well, but if they don't write me in English, I can't really communicate with the people writing in Mandarin or Taiwanese or
Yeah.
Cantonese or whatever. Unfortunately, I mean that's my own deficit, but I can't read those.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I'm just asking because I notice, kind of anecdotally on places like LinkedIn, for example, it seems like I don't know what your followers are like, but when I look at the amount of data related posts and questions and stuff, they're normally from, I would say it's overwhelmingly from places outside the U.S. right now,
Yeah,
mainly India, some Africa, China, not so much, but again, that's probably due to a lot of factors, like they don't have LinkedIn enabled over there or something. I don't know,
yeah,
but definitely India, South America is another big one, Mexico, and then the rest of the U.S. But like it's really cool seeing the just data is sort of prevalent. That might also be my own echo chamber or something. Who knows? But it is pretty fascinating to watch. And I think the first time I noticed it was in 2011 when Andrew Ng released his free machine learning course on, I think, what is now Coursera. I think at the
yeah.
time it was like 100,000 signups globally or something crazy number like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
I've known a couple of people who've taken that, and obviously Andrew Ng is an admirable, great teacher. I haven't taken the course myself, but I didn't realize there's quite that many enrollees. That's impressive.
well, yeah, that was back then too. And I can
Yeah,
only imagine it's grown now. But yeah, I was like, what the? Because before, these types of classes would have just been sort of limited to a university setting, or I don't even know where you would have learned this stuff online. Really, there were some books, but I think that class single handedly like opened the doors for a new generation of data people to sort of emerge on the scene. So, But anyway, yeah, I'm not sure where I was going with that other than the fact that I think, we're talking about this global presence of Python and stuff. It got me thinking, okay, so like how do books like yours and someday mine and others and all these resources just get into the hands of people around the world? I find that pretty interesting too, especially given just the sheer amount of data, learning resources available these days. It's kind of cool.
There are a lot, and there's a lot of competition for attention.
Mm.
I believe I've done a good one, and I hope the reputation of it rises on that basis. But there are a lot of people in the world, and what people become aware of is a very complex process.
And you've written a number of books over the years. What were some of the other ones that you've written?
Well, too many years ago, I did one on text processing in Python, which was just delightful. But that was like 17 years ago now, and on versions of old versions of Python. So don't buy the book now. Although you can go find it for free. It's on my website. It's not hard to find. But still, you shouldn't even read it for free because it's outdated. And I've done a couple. I didn't a name on the cover of a few other books, but I did a couple for O'Reilly that were on functional programming and about the Python versions, sort of during the 2 to 3 transition before Python 3 is dominant. So those are fun to do.
Nice.
But I've also written a lot of articles that are, not book length, but, widely read, which is delightful. I think before we actually went on, on camera, I mentioned that when I did the Charming Python for IBM, maybe it was on camera, but anyway, that it was so gratifying that there were actually literally millions of people who read that in the sort of 2000s.
That's so awesome.
And it was so touching when I would get, fan mail. But it's not the fan mail like a, popular fiction author yet. It's somebody, and especially when it's somebody from the global South, from people who may not have access to as many, being able to purchase physical books, but also maybe as much access to libraries and other resources. Now, more than then, everything is online. But anyway, so somebody from the global South or developing world who would write me and say, I read your article and I'm able to do this thing that I wasn't able to before. And so thank you for that. And that's just so wonderful, this thought of like, my words. And the large majority of those people who read those words never paid attention to the byline. And that's fine.
Right.
I don't care about my name. But the fact that I wrote words that enabled people in, technical areas, but still some people in the world to do things that they weren't able to before they read what I wrote, or at least, it would have been more difficult for them to without reading those words. It's just, I feel like I've given something to the world that way.
Is that what keeps you writing?
Yeah, it pretty much does. It's not, books don't make money. Hopefully I'll make a few $1,000 or something from the book, but it's not like it's not going to be big money.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, I do, from a sort of selfish perspective, I hope that it makes my name more recognized again. I've sort of not been as public of a name for a long time, and, whatever. Now it's on the cover of another book, so that is perhaps a reputational value. But honestly, that's, it's not like I can say that's completely not on my mind, but the idea of,
right,
helping people who work in areas like I work is much more valuable to me.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting in the age of social media too, and writing a book. That's how I think how we met each other on LinkedIn, right? And I've somehow found you in your book. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. Need to talk to this guy. Obviously, this is a topic that I think a lot about too.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have discovered your book any other way. Maybe randomly perusing, online O'Reilly or something and coming across it. But discovery, as you point out, there's just so many books out there right now, and so many articles and videos and courses and that's just in tech. That's competing with your attention, with Netflix and video games and going
Yeah.
on walks and and everything else. So yeah, it's
Oh,
interesting.
I should say, maybe you can put it up on the share for just a moment. But there's a landing page for my book that's
Oh,
at gnosis.cx/cleaning.
so sorry,
I,
what's it called?
Gnosis, Gnosis, Gnosis dot CX, Charlie X-ray /cleaning.
Can you just type it in the chat real quick? I'll
I will,
it's
yes,
like,
sorry
yeah,
about
sorry,
that. Now
I know
it's
worries.
chat.
Yeah,
Um,
got a mechanical keyboard. Okay, awesome. Yeah, let me share this real quick. Cool. So here's the page. You want to talk about it?
yeah, so just to let viewers know that the majority of the content from the book is you can read for free here,
Cool.
which I'm sort of getting pushback from my publisher, and they want it to be less, and I want it to be everything. So I'm going to work out that negotiation. But I mean, for me, I want people to see this, and of course, I want people to buy it as well. But I don't think that maintaining artificial scarcity is the way that compels people to buy books, because there are so many things they can do. They can get free articles. They can take courses for free or for cost, and you can buy other books and things like that. I think that letting people see what's there. If you click on the little hamburger icon to the left, there's the
Oh, cool.
various chapters, and you
Nice.
can select a chapter, and then when you do that, then it shows you the different sections within it. Oh, this is the glitch. I need to figure this out. So
Oh, no worries.
I deliberately made it so that on small like phones, it's just gonna say, get a different format. But your browser here doesn't look small, so
Okay.
um, sorry.
No
Um,
worries.
this will be worked out, and you will see the various subsections available in
Cool.
for other
Yeah. So
people.
for the audience, definitely go check out Gnosis at CX. I'll put this in the show notes on YouTube, on the
Yeah,
podcast as well when it's
wonderful.
out. Yeah. So yeah, definitely appreciate your willingness to share the book. I think and uh, just get the words out there and. Because you're right. I mean, it book's one of those things where you're probably the publisher might make a bit of money. You'll probably get a fraction of that, and that's how that goes. But the thing that's gonna stick around are the words you've written, and hopefully the people that they influence. So,
Yeah, and the people I help. I mean,
hmm
influence and help are related, but really,
I think help better actually. So yeah,
yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, and there's not. I mean, it does kind of bring it back full circle. It does blow my mind. There's not more attention paid to data cleaning. I think everyone pays it lip service. Like, yeah, a data scientist does data cleaning. Um, but then when you look for the materials, they'll teach you how to do that. I'm sure you did this in your book research. It's it's not nearly as popular as another book on PyTorch. Just isn't.
yeah.
So it's interesting.
And I do think that readers will find, and I apologize for your preview of the
No worries.
free Splashlight one having a technical glitch in recognizing your device. But assuming that's worked out, people can take a look for free. And I think there really will be ideas that even people who've been practitioners or, in data science in related fields, may not have thought of. I hope I have some ideas that uh, will maybe be obvious in retrospect, but nonetheless weren't obvious in advance. I'm sure
That's
there's
awesome.
many things I don't get to, but I've worked in these areas, and I've,
Yeah.
tripped over everything that's in the book pretty much
hmm
at one point or another. So, hopefully if someone else can think about how to think through the same kind of issues, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully you'll write a second edition at some point when you find all the other things you need to talk about and cover. So
Well, so one of the things I deliberately left out, it was a very brilliant friend of mine advised that I should put this, and I sort of have a comment in the conclusion about the fact that I'm not doing it for this book. But the suggestion that um, maybe data cleaning is really just another layer in the neural network or another number of layers.
Mm.
And in fact, it may be a machine learning problem identifying good data versus bad data. And I think this is a very interesting and promising idea. I mean, in some sense, if you are using, your handwritten statistical test or your handwritten, filter against the data, this is the kinds of things that machine learning techniques such as neural networks can learn, maybe in principle. So you have a neural network that comes before the neural network, or some layers of the network that are just the good versus bad classifier. So it's an intriguing and promising idea for the future, and I decided not to include it for two reasons, both because it's terribly difficult to figure out exactly what I should write, and I mean there's a lot of different kinds of data and a lot of different problems people are working with, but also because I feel like this is probably something that happens in the future, but it's sort of just at that cusp of not quite yet. And anything I might write today, no matter how careful I was, would become dated very quickly as this practice gets better.
I think that's fair. And it also seems, I think for the purpose of what you're trying to convey in the book, introducing machine learning and data cleaning to do data cleaning in a data cleaning book,
Yeah.
it's a bit circular, because it's like now, I have to do data cleaning to train my model to do the data cleaning, and then it's going to do the data cleaning, and then I got to re-update my model to do better data cleaning. But I have to do the data cleaning on the training data, right? So it's like that. It's an interesting hypothesis. I could see that's where things are going to be going. In fact, it was funny before our talk, I had somebody message me asking, "Do you know of any AI enabled data quality products?" And it's like, um, maybe, but I really want to know more about your use case first. This seems like kind of
Yeah.
a weird question to ask just out of the gate. So, um, but yeah, I thank you for not including that in your book. So
Well, also would have to be 1,000 pages instead of 500, which is probably too much.
yeah, that seems like it's almost a separate book, like using like the next version, like using machine learning, using data science to develop machine learning models to clean data or something. I don't know.
Something
So
like that. There's probably
something
a
like that.
slightly prettier way to put
Yeah,
it, but yeah,
it's pretty lame, but
maybe
yeah.
that's the next book.
So awesome. Well, cool. I think it's a good place to wrap it up. Again, you want to hold up your book real quick and give a shout out?
Absolutely. So this book, everybody should. Oh, I have to hold it right.
Yeah,
Everybody should enjoy this book, and everybody should buy it.
cool. Where can they buy it?
Oh, anywhere.
Anywhere? Okay.
Sorry, I should have a link ready, but that you can go to the Packt site. You can go to the landing page that I mentioned. You can go to Amazon or booksellers near you. Wear a
Okay.
mask. You go in, but it should be available.
Awesome. Well, David, this has been a fun chat. And again, thanks for your contributions to the Python community. In all seriousness, it's not every day I get to talk to someone who's been as involved as you have been and for this long. And I think that's to me that's really cool and remarkable. So
So
awesome.
thank you so much.
Yeah,
It
of
was
course.
it was wonderful talking.
Cool. All right. Until then, we'll talk to you later. So have a good one.
Bye bye.
All right. See ya.